Welcome everybody to our webinar on our iNaturalist CSI. So this is the first part of our iNaturalist series to help identify, target and identify certain species, species groups. And this one is focusing on invasive species, and in particular on invasive insects. So you can stay tuned actually for the next couple in this kind of mini series within this, coming up on July 26th for invasive aquatic species, and on August 30th for invasive plants. We'll be sending around notices about that to our email list, and it will be on iNaturalist.ca and in an announcement there, so you can find it through that way as well. Also to note that this webinar and the others we've delivered that on identifications, but other things with iNaturalist and outreach and some of the things that CWF has done can be found on our website. So this is being recorded if you want to go back and check or share it with others. The best place to find it is if you Google CWF webinars. I'll also drop it in the chat in a little bit as a link directly to that. I'd like to start by just acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from Gatineau, Quebec, and I'd like to acknowledge with immense gratitude that the land from which I'm presenting and where I live, work, and play is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. I'm James Paget. I'm the Species at Risk and Biodiversity Specialist at Canadian Wildlife Federation. I work on species at risk, a number of different aspects within CWF, but also have been the lead on iNaturalist as well, both for CWF and kind of in Canada. And Kelly Sherman is she joined Canadian Council on Invasive Species. She will be our presenter. So I'm hosting this. Kelly will be presenting. She joined Canadian Council on Invasive Species as the coordinator in 2017. Her previous employment included the coordinator of the Ontario Invasive Plant Council and a stewardship technician with the Kawartha Conservation. Kelly's main role with the CCIS is project management, all things communication, fundraising, partnership building, and event planning. And she lives in Peterborough, Ontario. A couple of logistical things just to kind of mention for audio settings. If you're having difficulty with audio, first of all, check your settings and make sure Zoom has access to your speakers and your headphones. If that doesn't work, leaving the webinar and joining will often fix the problem. If for any reason we do end, the webinar abruptly stops, if there's a glitch or whatever, then you can rejoin. We'll start it up again, but rejoin using the same link that you did to join originally. The chat function, everyone will be able to chat just with panelists and presenters. So that's myself and Kelly. We'll see those chat posts, but for others, they won't be able to see those. So we're kind of keeping this for technical issues like not seeing presentation or audio problems. What we're wanting people to do is for questions is to enter that into the Q&A that people will find at the bottom of their screen. You can enter this at any time, and ideally kind of do that as they come up in your mind as your question arises. But we'll store those and then answer these at the end. We'll have some time for questions at the end. But if there's some kind of technical or very specific ones, I can try and reply during Kelly's presentation as well. So you can write them in as you go. So a little bit about CWF. We're one of Canada's largest conservation organizations. We undertake projects in conservation across the country, and our mission is to conserve and inspire the conservation of Canada's wildlife and habitats for the use and enjoyment of all. We do this in a number of ways, through some specific projects in freshwater, marine environment, terrestrial environments, many of which target species at risk, like the right whale, the Blanding's turtle, at-risk bats, and monarch butterfly. But we also do this through engaging the public and youth in education and awareness programs like our Wild Outside program, like our Canadian Conservation Corps, as well as in community science, like in iNaturalist Canada. And we'll hear a little bit more about that. So CWF runs and leads iNaturalist in Canada, together with our partners that you see here. And together we make up the kind of iNaturalist steering committee. And iNaturalist Canada in particular is part of a global network of 19 different countries that have their own version, just like we do here in Canada. And each country has their own iteration that's translated into local languages. These all feed into what is known as the global iNaturalist.org database run by the California Academy of Sciences in partnership with National Geographic. And this has over 1 million observations globally, 8 million of which are here in Canada. And the database is open access. It's searchable by anybody who wants to browse the data, and downloadable as well for use. And specifically, we share this with certain organizations for conservation and research purposes. And that's a primary reason why we're encouraging people to use iNaturalist Canada, because it allows us to share this data more easily for conservation and research purposes. And the database can be filtered, and this is kind of where I'm going to touch a little bit on introduced species, invasive species. And so here we can filter to show all the introduced species that are in Canada. And different filters, different species-specific searches can be done within the database. As we can see, there's 900,000, almost 1 million observations of species that iNaturalist has tagged as introduced in Canada. And Kelly will talk more about what that means. So a big takeaway with iNaturalist is that you don't need to be an expert to contribute. Kind of, if you can take a picture, you can contribute to conservation. That's the very kind of simple kind of end goal of iNaturalist, is anybody can take part, and you don't need to be an expert. And the reason for this is there's a very simple to use app, very intuitive. It accesses your camera to take a photo. It automatically records the date and your location and allows you to add any notes about it. For those that are more interested and prone towards websites, there's iNaturalist.ca, allows the same thing. You can drag and drop photos or sounds. The app also allows for sound recording. And it again pulls the date from the photo properties. And from there, both of these, the app and website, have image recognition software that will help you identify the species by providing suggestions of what the species is. And it's quite good. So it does provide some pretty reliable suggestions. But on top of that, there's also a community of over 250,000 people around the world that are helping to identify observations. So there are people that browse observations and help with these identifications. And something to keep in mind is the better your photo is that you record, the better the chances of it becoming identified. To help with some of this, CWF has created some helpful resources like how-to guides, but also tips. We've created some guides on tips for taking photos for different species groups. We also have video tutorials and, of course, webinars like this one you're all attending. So this information and more of it, as more help, is found at iNaturalist, the help page, iNaturalist.ca/help. So anybody looking for some of these resources can find all that there. And with that, I will pass it over to Kelly to start letting you know about invasive species.
Awesome. Thank you, James. I'll just share my screen here. How does that look? I think it looks okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, great. Awesome. Thank you so much, James. That was a great intro and kind of gave me some more information about iNaturalist as well. Yeah, so hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Kelly Sherman. I'm the Operations Supervisor with the Canadian Council on Invasive Species. And I just want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from the traditional Michi-Sagig Nishnabeg territory, also known as Peterborough, Ontario. And I gratefully acknowledge that I am an uninvited guest in this occupying this territory. Okay, so happy to be here. Thank you so much. So as James said, we're kind of doing a mini series within their series on invasive ID, including insects, plants, and aquatic invasive species. So there might be some species in here that don't cross you know, we might not have as many from some of the territories, but there'll be lots more in the other presentations to come. And I'll kind of touch on how we got to the species that I've decided to present on today as well. So before I do that, I just want to briefly touch on who the Canadian Council is. I'm sure if anyone attended some of our other presentations with CWF, you might have heard this prior, but just a brief touch base. So the Canadian Council on Invasive Species is a federally registered not-for-profit. We were actually kind of started quite a few years ago, I think over 10 years ago, as a result of a multi-agency kind of Canada-wide national meeting that called on a strong national organization to link the invasive species perspectives and groups from Canada and coast to coast to coast. So today the CCIS is represented by a 4-chamber board of directors, as you can see on the screen there: governments, industry, businesses, Indigenous organizations, and chapters, which I'll touch on briefly. But really, our main goal is kind of what I just described: enhancing collaboration, connecting with the invasive species councils across Canada, other stakeholders and partners, Indigenous groups, to address invasive species across Canada. Our kind of main focus is focused on pathways, so those that spread invasive species, but also emerging priorities, emerging species as well. And we really want to stimulate the communities and Canadians to take action. So this is just a quick snapshot of our current board of directors and some of the organizations that sit on our board of directors. And then briefly, I just want to touch on chapters. So as I kind of just mentioned, the goal of the council was to link perspectives and groups across Canada together. And that's kind of what we've done with our chapter network. So we've established this chapter network made up of 11 chapters. And so a chapter is defined as a provincial or territorial non-for-profit or charitable organization that is really considered that provinces or territories invasive species quote council, and has a core mandate of reducing the impacts from invasive species within their jurisdiction. And so, like I mentioned, this chapter network really facilitates and supports our goal to build that strong national inclusive voice that supports species from coast to coast. So as mentioned, we've made significant progress. We do have chapters almost all provinces and territories, just with the exception of Nunavut and Newfoundland and Labrador, but that's something we're keen to work on and focus on. Okay, so moving into kind of invasive species, and again, I'll just briefly touch on this as well, and kind of what defines an invasive species. So as, oh, I move ahead here. So James was referring to introduced species in iNaturalist. So introduced species generally are species that are non-native to Canada, but really what makes an invasive species invasive is that it has a negative impact on the environment, economy, and our society, including human health. So it can be a plants, animals, or microorganisms that have been accidentally or deliberately introduced into areas beyond their native range. But like I said, they really do cause that detrimental impact. And so just a few quick stats here. So in Canada, the estimated annual cumulative lost revenue caused by 16 invasive species, I don't have all the species listed, is between 13 to 35 billion. That was, I believe, a study from a few years ago. Invasive species that damage the agriculture and forestry industries results in an estimated 7.5 billion lost in revenue annually. And also, I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with an organization by the acronym IPBES, but the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services has said that invasive species are one of the 5 direct drivers of biodiversity loss in the world. So very significant, and why I'm here today. So again, really quickly, because I want to get into ID, just referencing some of the pathways of spread, mostly when they're here. I will kind of touch on each species, kind of like how they got here and then how they spread, but these are some of the pathways that we kind of focus on, things like outdoor recreation on land and water, like boats and ATVs that could spread aquatic and terrestrial invasive species, firewood movement, which is definitely a big one for the insects I'll be talking about. The gardening and horticultural trade is definitely a concern, the pet and aquarium trade and things like agriculture, and there's definitely some I'm missing on there as well. Okay, so getting into kind of the bulk of the presentation, which is those top 10 invasive insect species across Canada. So just a few disclaimers before I get into them. So these are definitely just some invasive insects across Canada. Definitely not all of them, but kind of, it was kind of hard to narrow down to just 10. So we worked with our chapters to do this. So I surveyed our chapters and had them send in kind of like their top 3 insects, and then plants, which we'll be doing in another presentation, and aquatic. And we kind of prioritized them from the most voted on to the least, and we came up with this top 10 that I'll be going through. So it's just a snapshot, and I'll be going through them fairly quickly, and I tried to stay kind of high level and focus on those key features, and try to provide like 1 or 2 tips as well. And also including, I'm going to include some signs and symptoms of their damage as well, because that's often what might be seen before you actually see the species itself. Also, the first 3 species, you'll see the word alert. I'll move to this slide, because these species aren't here yet, and are on our borders and are especially of concern. And that's why I've labeled them alert, and something that is very important to community science and iNaturalist, because you know, the more we have out there, and like James said, you don't need to be an expert, but it's important to know these species, because you are using the app or any other reporting app and you capture one of these species, you could really help lead to maybe an early detection, rapid response situation, which actually sort of happened with the Asian Longhorn beetle, but which I'll jump into right now. So starting with the Asian Longhorn beetle. Some of you might have heard of a lot of these species as well, but maybe need a little bit more information on ID and maybe some background. So the Asian Longhorn beetle is a highly destructive wood-boring insect native to several countries in Asia, including China, Japan, and South Korea. Asian Longhorn beetle was actually found in Ontario, but was eradicated. So that's perhaps where some of might have heard of Asian Longhorn beetle. I don't actually know if it was a community science report. I can't recall exactly, but it was found early and a rapid response situation was put into place. So in terms of its spread, it could actually accidentally be transported here in things like shipping containers, wood packaging, pallets, crates, that kind of thing. And you'll probably see that as the common denominator for quite a few of these species. And then once here, it could be spread long distances through things like packaging still, or maybe firewood and logs, things like that. So really the key impacts, or the impacts from Asian Longhorn beetle is that it feeds on tree species, including mountain ash and horse chestnut, as well as other species like maple, willow, poplar, and birch. So some species like, say, emerald ash borer, which I'll touch on, kind of have that one species that it feeds on, but others have quite a few, which makes it even more important to watch out for. But essentially, adult and larval feeding can damage and stunt young trees and reduce the quality of wood, and also, like many other potential invasive pests, it can just make that tree susceptible to more disease as well, which we don't want. So in terms of identification, again, just as I kind of mentioned, I'm going to try to stick to those high level kind of key features, starting kind of with the adults. So adult beetles to the left there are roughly 2 to 4 centimeters long and bullet shaped. The abdomen, as you can see, is black with white speckles. The foot pads are blue. The antennae are longer than the body, so that's kind of a defining feature, and I'll show you a lookalike photo as well, which might help, and have those really distinct bluish white and black stripes, as you can see there. I should have put a pointer up. But yeah, you can see the distinct white and bluish black stripes in the antenna. And the adults are mostly active from early summer to fall. Adult beetles feed on foliage for a few weeks, and then the female beetles then chew grooves into the bark to lay single eggs that hatch within 2 weeks. So again, I'm trying to tie in some of the signs and symptoms with the ID of the actual species itself. So to the right there, you can see the holes or the chew grooves where the eggs may have been laid. Adult beetles emerge by chewing their way out of the trunk, leaving large round holes. I don't have a picture of that. And then again, I just included the larvae as just kind of a plus there. They kind of look like large grubs and have those pointed mouth parts, and the end is kind of like a creamy white. So kind of the tip for this species and a reminder of the host species. So again, this one's a little bit more variety: maple, willow, poplar, and birch families. Again, be cautious of moving firewood when it comes to this species, and take note of its look-alike. which is mostly in Eastern Canada, and I have a picture here. So I know this isn't the white-spotted sawyer isn't all of Canada. I believe it's mostly Eastern Canada, but I thought it'd be important to just bring up its most common lookalike. So yeah, just take note of its lookalike. You can see the invasive on the right there. So you can see, again, this is a better picture of how long the antennae are and how much bigger it is. And then the native white-spotted sawyer, the lines on the antenna are a lot less defined. It's smaller, more of like a brownie color. And then the antenna is not quite as long. Okay, so moving on to our next alert species, spotted lanternfly, which we actually just completed a really informative fact sheet on, which can be found at CanadaInvasives.ca. So I stole most of this information from there. But spotted lanternfly is a dangerous pest threatening Canada. A voracious sapsucker, this Southeast Asian native has the potential to cause catastrophic damage to both Canada's agriculture industry and its natural environment. So in terms of spread, spotted lanternflies, so like I said, it's not here yet, so it's important species to watch out for. In terms of if it gets here and it spreads, spotted lanternflies can naturally spread short distances by flight, but they can also disperse long distances, usually accidentally transported by humans. Potential industry vectors, so things that may bring it here are things like, which I've talked about already, shipping pallets, containers, cargo, that kind of thing. So something that I guess I should just mention, we definitely work with stakeholders on sharing that information about preventing that spread as well. But within Canada, we focus on take action and actions Canadians can take to prevent the spread once in Canada. But if it is found here, potential domestic vectors for spotted lanternflies includes things like, again, firewood, vehicles, etc. Especially human-aided movement can occur really with any life stages, but is particular for egg masses, similar to Spongy Moth, which I'll also talk about. But egg masses are really difficult to spot, and they can stick to things like patio furniture and like canoes and things like that. So it's transported easily once it's here, which makes it kind of that more potential to spread. And really the impact of spotted lanternfly, it feeds on the phloem, so a sugary tissue that plants and trees need to feed and grow. And they really are adaptable to a wide range of plants. So again, a lot of species for this particular invasive insect: apple, grape, black walnut, butternut, maple, willow, etc. So a particular concern for spotted lanternfly is that it really threatens the high valued grape, tree, fruit, and forest industries, and it may even threaten maple syrup and Christmas tree industries as well. So in terms of identification, this slide is going to look a little different than my other specific ID slides because, again, I stole this nice diagram from our fact sheet. And I'm not going through all the life stages for all the species. Again, it can be quite overwhelming in the span of an hour presentation, but I thought it was, I might as well utilize what we have from our fact sheet, and it is pretty straightforward for this species. So in kind of the fall winter, you can see at the top round picture there, egg masses are generally 2.5 centimeters long and covered in like a gray waxy coating. And then as you move into early spring, the older egg masses lose their coating, revealing like brown eggs, which you can see there in the second circle. Spring, summer, you can see at first nymphs are black with white spots. And then as it progresses, early summer, they start to show a little bit more color, reddish as they mature, and they retain their white spots. And then late summer, you have kind of what I would say the most distinctive looking part of its life stage, which I'll just go back to the previous slide. So you can see there when it's an adult, it's pretty distinct with those spots and the red, that kind of thing. Yeah, so just again, in terms of maybe more signs and symptoms, there might be muddy gray egg masses on around the host trees in late spring. Also, I don't have a picture, sorry about that, but there can be, if it is being damaged, dark streaks or sap flowing down the bark of the tree resulting from the spotted lanternfly like having caused the damage by feeding on the phloem. But like I said, in terms of this one, the host species trees are quite ranging. But in tips of if you're looking for it in the spring, same with tying to Spongy Moth, which may, if you're in Ontario, may have experienced last summer. When you're pulling at your stuff in the spring, look for those egg masses, look for things on your furniture, that kind of thing. Yeah. moving forward. Oh, and also this is a good, did I put it on the right species? Spotted lanternfly, yes. Okay, so its favorite host actually is the tree of heaven, which is also an invasive tree to Canada. So not the best picture, a little fuzzy, but it's similar to looking to sumac, but it has the white flowers instead of red. So interesting to note that its actually favorite host is also an invasive tree.
Kelly, can I just, a couple pertinent questions just came in as you're chatting. I think it would be good.
Okay.
Someone was asking, is it I think there's a typo on the slide. It said Lanternfly versus Lanternfly. So to just clarify.
Okay, it's Lanternfly. Lanternfly. That might have been
with an N, yeah. And related to someone was asking, is this a moth species?
I believe so. I'm not as familiar with all the different families and genuses of all the insects, but I believe so. But I might want to just double check on that, and maybe I can put my email in the chat if anyone have any questions that I'm unable to answer.
And I can check as you go. iNaturalist has a good feature that you can look into the taxonomy of a species when you
yes.
Look through an observation. So I can look into that because iNaturalist offers some extra information about each species there.
Okay, and I also, so it's Lanternfly, and I actually just looked at our fact sheet, and it is a plant hopper. So if that helps anyone.
Okay, so not a moth, a leaf hopper then.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, awesome. Yes, I will disclaimer that I jump around. I'm more of a jack of all trades of all the species, so I'm not an expert on all of the species, but more of a jack of all trades. So I'll do my best, but we'll also get the answer for you if we can't answer it. Okay, so moving on to the last, I believe, alert species I have here, which is the Asian giant hornet. Again, this one definitely I'm not as familiar with as the other because it's quite kind of newer, as I'm sure many people have seen it in the news. But a lot of interesting facts about it, and is definitely one to be concerned about, or to be on the watch. I shouldn't say concerned, but just kind of be on the watch for. So Asian giant hornets are the largest hornet in the world. They are found throughout South and East Asia and were likely brought to North America accidentally on container ships. Asian giant hornets were actually first seen in BC in 2019 in Nanaimo, and following the discovery, BC government officials together with local beekeepers destroyed the nest, and then no sightings have been since, to my understanding. And again, I'm not sure, it possibly could have been, I hope it was a community science, potentially like potentially from a local beekeeper. But again, kind of one of those success stories of early detection and rapid response. So interesting facts in terms of its impact. I thought this was key to include. So Asian giant hornets can be compared to the lions and great white sharks of the insect world. So they're actually carnivores that kill other insects for food. Unfortunately, they can have a large impact on honeybee populations and can cause serious damage to a honeybee hive. They can actually kill up to 30,000 honeybees in a few hours. So this is really significant. And also, if you're curious, if you Google the Washington State Department of Agriculture, they maintain a virtual interactive map of Asian giant hornet sightings across Canada and the US. So just Google Washington State Department interactive map Asian giant hornet. And I also just wanted to bring up this disclaimer here. It's a stinging insect. Hornets will deliver a painful venomous sting in defense of their nest. So again, if you're allergic, just really take caution. And if you find a nest, do not attempt to remove it yourself. So in terms of ID, I don't have the best, the pictures are a little bit more challenging to find. But key features, I guess starting with the nest, typically they nest in underground cavities or above ground in tree stumps or forested areas. They emerge in late April to early May and to establish their new nest. So the head, as you can see to the left, is bright orange or yellow with large jaws and entirely black eyes. The thorax, where the legs and wings attach, is dark brown or black, and the wings are tinted brown, as you can see to the right. The most defining feature I would say for Asian giant hornet, and what I've kind of talked to other colleagues about, is that regular black and orange horizontal stripes on the abdomen. So you can see to the right there, it's pretty defined. But also another really key feature is that it's really big. So I have a comparison picture here. So that's another big defining feature of it, is that of its size. So you can see on the right there, European Hornet with the Asian Giant Hornet, and note the distinctive size. And then the middle as well with the bold-faced Hornet, and then the left. I mean, it is similar in size to the cicada killer, but you can see the difference on the abdomen. It doesn't have those defined stripes, and they have different wings. Okay, so moving on to more potentially, I guess those really kind of like the alert species, but moving on to still really important species that are kind of in parts of Canada, but still really important, because I know sometimes it can get a little disheartening in areas where these species are pretty prevalent, but it's still really important to note them, report them. It's important to track where they are, their spread, their distribution, and also, of course, watch out for spreading them yourself, which I'll talk a little bit about. But emerald ash borer is an invasive wood-boring beetle native to parts of Asia, rapidly spreading across North America, killing usually up to 99% of ash trees in its path. It's currently established in Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. It most likely arrived here through wood shipping, again, usually shipping. And when it's here, it spreads mostly through firewood movement. So prevention of that is really key. So I'll talk about our take action programs really quickly at the end, but you know, there's consensus on distance of moving firewood is kind of up in the air. We've always usually just promoted buy local, burn local. So just buying and burning as locally as possible and not transporting it from really big distances. So just a quick point on some impacts. Over the next decade, some estimates suggest that 17 million trees will need to be removed and replaced within communities in the US alone. This would have cost approximately 10.7 billion. Again, that's the US. As of 2012, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency had already spent over 30 million to manage the invasion of emerald ash borer and cut 30,000 trees to manage its spread. Those are just some statistics. There's definitely more from other municipalities across Canada. I just want to also mention, you know, just go back quickly. Generally, like I said, sometimes you see the signs and symptoms first of the damage. So things like, and you can, in the picture there, the bottom left, crown dieback, bark deformities could be a symptom. D-shaped exit holes, which I'll show you a picture of. Woodpecker feeding holes, yellowing foliage, and then you can see there at the bottom right, larval galleries beneath the bark. As another symptom, if you have a chance to, sometimes the bark is peeling, you can see underneath. So in terms of ID, the adult beetle, probably the most distinctive part when it is an adult. So it has that shiny emerald or copper green colored body. The eyes are large, bronze or black and kidney shaped, and the body is quite narrow. But this one I did include a few other pictures of just the other life stages. Probably most to note is the larvae. It has that segmented body. Pupation occurs in early spring when development is complete. And then the adult, that's why I want to mention this, the adult will chew itself out of the tree, leaving that D-shaped exit hole, as you can see here. So definitely another defining sign and symptom, but could lead to identification, that kind of thing. And then just a reminder, yeah, host species. This one's a little bit more focused than the other ones, kind of pretty much all ash species, native ash species in Canada, and watch out for those D-shaped exit holes for sure. Okay, moving on to Hemlock woolly adelgid. This one might be a little bit less familiar, but who knows? So Hemlock woolly adelgid is an aphid-like insect that attacks and kills hemlock trees. Its egg sacs, which look like cotton balls or clumps of snow, can be found at the base of needles. It can be spread by wind, animals, and human movement on nursery stock, logs, and other wood products, including, of course, firewood. So this pest, the Hemlock woolly adelgid, I just want to note, actually affects the eastern hemlock. So in North America, or sorry, I'll mention, I think I have a little bit more information on it, but maybe not. But in Western BC, they have the Western hemlock. And so Hemlock woolly adelgid doesn't affect that species the same. It's a genetically different strain of Hemlock woolly delegate and causes minor damage to the western hemlock, which are protected by a natural resistance to Hemlock woolly delegate. So this is mostly concerned for the eastern hemlock, and which is a huge foundational tree in Nova Scotian forests. Like I mentioned, it feeds at the base of the hemlock needles, causing premature dieback, needle loss, foliage thinning, and tree death. It can also really, large scale impacts similar to ash affect like the surrounding environment as well. So in North America, it was first recorded in Virginia in the 1950s, and then it was most likely imported unintentionally through nursery stock, and then from there it slowly spread. I believe it was first recorded in 2017 in Nova Scotia. So in terms of it's, like I mentioned, it's an aphid-like insect that parasitizes eastern hemlock. So before it gets to the egg stage, there are a few generations of life cycles at different times of the season, but again, a little bit, probably too much detailed information, so I kind of took those out, but I did include a picture of both the waxy coats and oblong amber eggs in the white woolly ovisac. So you have the eggs there at the bottom left, and then the white woolly sacs at the top right, which is probably the most defining feature. So again, a few more signs and symptoms, like I said, the woolly sacs, other signs and symptoms of its actual damage, premature bud and shoot dieback, needle loss, thinning crown, that kind of thing. And like I said, I just mentioned the BC species as well, which is kind of like, so, if you're in BC, it's not as concerned as Eastern Canada. Okay, moving on to brown marmorated stink bug. And I might have to go a little bit more quickly through my last 5 species, which I was planning to anyways. So the brown marmorated stink bug, or BMSB, is native to Asia. It was actually accidentally introduced to the US in the 1990s. Since then, it has spread quite widely and has been detected in Ontario, Quebec, BC, Alberta, PEI, and as well as established in areas of Ontario, BC, and Quebec. It feeds on over 100 different plant species, including apple trees and sweet corn, and is considered definitely extremely destructive. So it came here from East Asia, most likely as well through shipping. It's an excellent hitchhiker, which makes it spread quite quickly and can be moved large distances on vehicles, that kind of thing. It's actually been intercepted quite a few times in Ontario on trade goods coming in. It's really anticipated that will continue to spread. But it is a serious agricultural pest because its adults and the nymphs feed on over 35 fruiting crops, but it's not just limited to agricultural crops as well. So this one is actually a little bit more tricky to identify in comparison. We have a few other species that look like it, which I'll show in the next slide. But briefly, just some key features. So the top, or the dorsal, the top of the bug, is kind of like the marbly brown, and then the bottom of it, or the ventral, is a little bit more pale. It has distinct pinkish tinge on the forewings when they're spread. It's kind of hard to see in this picture. The legs have a poorly defined white band. One kind of key, like I said, this one's a little bit tricky, but one key defining feature that keeps popping up is that it has, I don't know if my arrow is showing, but if you can see kind of like even like a human, like where its shoulders are, they're a bit rounded, which you'll see in the next slide. In comparison to other species, they're more pointed, so that's kind of a defining feature. So they're kind of confused sometimes with things like rough stink bugs and brown stink bugs, but they have more pointed, edgy shoulders, which I'll show you. So signs and symptoms of damage would be things like destroyed tissue of fruit, hardened flesh of fruit, that kind of thing. And so you can see here just some other lookalike species. These ones are pretty, the top ones are a little bit more distinctive, the box elder bug, that kind of thing. But you can see the brown stink bud at the bottom left has those more pointed shoulders. And then to the right is the BMSB, and it's more rounded. Again, pretty hard. I think it was a brown stink bug in my raspberries one time, and I spent a long time trying to make sure it was not the stink bug, the brown marmorated stink bug. I'm not sure I ever really solved it, but I'm 99% sure it wasn't the invasive kind. Okay, moving on to Dutch elm disease. This one's a little different. Is actually a fungus that clogs the elm tree's water conducting systems spread by insects, causing the tree to die. So it's mostly spread by elm bark beetles that spread the fungus when feeding, and it's established in every province except Alberta and BC. Most likely came in from Asia or Europe through infected lumber in the early 1930s. So once a province is infected with this, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency prohibits the industry from selling or moving elms out of the province. So this is more important for those provinces that don't have it, so Alberta and BC. But this is potentially could cause impact to those provinces and it would be very severe for local tree nurseries who have inventory of the species. And also it can cause damage to stands of elm as well. So in terms of ID, you can see these are pictures of some of the signs and symptoms of its damage. So leaves wilting, that kind of thing, crown dieback, similar to emerald ash borer. Again, some more pictures of just like the damage. I tried to focus on that in terms of this species. So leaves can turn yellow. Symptoms can also be seen under the bark of infected branches. When the bark is peeled back, healthy elm wood is usually cream colored, but when it's diseased, the dark brown or red streaks can be seen instead. And so the fungus is spread from one elm tree to another, mainly by 3 species of elm bark beetle: the smaller European beetle, the banded, and the native elm bark beetle. And the beetles breed under the bark of the dead or dying wood. The new generation of beetles emerge from a diseased tree carrying the fungal spores with them. The beetles then infest healthy elms on which they feed, thereby spreading the disease. You can also see there's the galleries underneath. You can see breeding galleries on the surface of the wood under the bark can also be used to identify. So the smaller European elm bark beetle and the banded elm bark beetle galleries are single and run along the grain of the wood. And then the native elm bark beetle galleries are double and run across the grain. Okay, moving on to Japanese beetle. So Japanese beetle is an invasive pest in North America and poses a severe threat to ecosystem and industries. Adult Japanese beetle can feed on over 300 species of plants, including many of species of agriculture and horticultural importance. So we've kind of moved from kind of those forest pest species into kind of like, well, we've jumped around a bit, but there's kind of the agriculture and horticultural invasive insects that are of significance, and then those forest pest ones as well. So currently it is in New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Ontario, PI, and Quebec, but it's partially or has been found and then eradicated in BC and Newfoundland. They were first established in North America in 1916 in the eastern United States and have moved westward. Most likely came in through the port trade, soil, that kind of thing. And it can cause significant impact to agricultural sector as well as food and ornamental industries as well. So in terms of some key features for ID, you can see there the adult to the left, around 1 centimeter long. They're oval shape and have a hard, shiny green exoskeleton and brown wing covers. I don't have a good picture. You can kind of see the best defining characteristics of the beetle is the 6 tufts of white hairs running down the sides of the abdomen. Well, you can see it there, yes. I don't know, again, I don't know if my pointer is working, but that's the most defining feature. And then again, another defining feature when it's in its adult form is that metallic green color with bronze colored wing covers. And the population seemed to peak in July to August. I included a picture of larvae. Again, grubs could potentially be in soil, that kind of thing, or what looks like grubs, I should say. So they have the yellow-brown head. They live in the soil and feed on grass roots, and they kind of look like similar to other grubs. In terms of another just signs and symptoms is the damage. So that's kind of leaf damage associated with the Japanese beetle. And then you have your turf damage as well, which may be a sign and symptom to look out for. Okay, I think we're on our second to last. So Spongy Moth. Again, if you're Ontario, you're probably very familiar with Spongy Moth. I have one key pretty significant fact on its damage in 2021. But we also have a fact sheet on this as well on our website if you're curious. But essentially, spongy moths are insects native to Europe. They feed on the leaves of a wide range of host tree species, including oak, willow, birch, and maple. So again, pretty widespread. They are established in Quebec, New Brunswick, Ontario, Nova Scotia, PI, and have been detected in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. They were actually introduced to North America in 1869 as part of a failed silkworm breeding experiment. So the moth larvae can naturally disperse short distances on wind-blown silk threads, and then adult males can fly short distances, but females cannot. And spongy moths can spread even further by accidentally being transported. So the spread is similar to spotted lanternfly, is that they can spread in any life stage, but usually we transport the eggs on things like furniture in the spring, equipment, that kind of thing. So again, further other domestic vectors would be things like firewood, vehicles, gear, etc. And so really the significant impacts from spongy moth is that they defoliate. So they remove the leaves from the trees. And this makes the tree susceptible to damage and disease. So it may not kill the tree. I noticed we had a property last summer that a lot of the trees came back, but sometimes it doesn't. And just with its widespread damage, it's really creating those trees that could be more susceptible to disease. So actually in 2021, spongy moths defoliated 1.8 million hectares of trees in Ontario. That's equivalent to more than 3 million football fields. So of course, damage also lowers the economic value of trees as well. So yeah, in terms of maybe, again, I just know a little bit more Ontario, but it is here. So the most significant thing is to prevent its spread. It also does kind of go through these cycles. So we've had spongy moths kind of, I guess you could say, blooms in years prior, but if we are potentially experiencing that again, it's important to just be aware of spread. So cleaning, furniture, etc., from the eggs, etc. And I believe the best method is scraping them off and putting them in a bucket of soapy water. So yeah, in terms of just a little bit more on ID, again, I have this fancy diagram here. In the fall, winter, the egg masses you can see there, which I'm sure if you're, again, I keep referencing Ontario, I apologize, but I'm in Ontario and it was such a significant concern last year, but the egg masses are pretty defined. You can see they're kind of brownish, fuzzy kind of looking egg masses. And early spring, early summer, the larvae go through a series of molts, and you can see they start to form into their distinctive caterpillar, which kind of has those two red dots on the back in a line. Early to midsummer, the larvae become reddish brown for 1 to 2 weeks. And late summer, we start to see the males are mottled brown and have a wingspan. And again, I have to make sure if this is I believe, yeah, it is a moth species, not a jumper. So when they actually do become moths, they're pretty distinctive. They have the females have white with black markings and have, they actually are kind of pretty as a moth, to be honest, but they are pretty distinctive when you do see them flying around and have that pale color of the females. Okay, last but not least, and hopefully we have time for a few more questions, is lily leaf beetle. So the lily leaf beetle, also known as the red or scarlet lily beetle, is an invasive insect of Eurasian origin. It was first reported in North America and Eastern Canada during World War II, again, most likely introduced in shipments of plant materials from Europe. So it is in all provinces except may not yet be in BC, and I don't believe it's in the territory, so mostly southern parts of Canada. And really the significant damage can be caused to like ornamental species like true lily species. So key features in terms of ID, the adults are bright red and approximately 1/4 inch long with black legs, head and antenna and undersides. And actually, I was gonna maybe go back. So you can see their adult there to the right is pretty distinctive with that all red body and then the black legs, underside, and antenna. When disturbed, the beetles actually tumble from the plants and land upside down on the ground where they kind of play dead. Their dark colored undersides make them hard to spot. So to potentially deter predators, adults actually squeak if squeezed, which is interesting. You can see there a bit of damage to the right. So both the adults and larvae chew irregular holes and notches in lily leaves, stems, and developing buds. The larvae are the more damaging stage of the insect. When the feeding damage is severe, they can completely defoliate plants and destroy flowers in early summer. So again, damage can be quite significant. In terms of prevention, again, watch for, not moving soil, that kind of thing, sharing plants, etc. And of course, just keeping an eye out for the damage and the species itself. Okay, I just wanted to quickly mention, like I said at the start, we didn't have kind of from our chapter network a ton of species from the territories, but I did just want to briefly kind of give a plug to our territorial chapters, which is the Northwest Territory Invasive Pest Pathogen and Species Council. I might have mixed that up. And then the Yukon Invasive Species Council. So just from Northwest Territories, just thought I'd mention others potentially of concern kind of in this category of the series, things like spruce budworm and spruce needle rust. But I do just encourage you to visit, if you're in that area, their website and reach out to them in terms of other species that you might be wanting to be on the lookout for. And then in terms of what you can do, kind of tying it back to James at the start in terms of iNaturalist, again, just taking pictures and reporting. And like you said, you don't need to be an expert. And if you do choose things like iNaturalist, it's nice because it gives you, if you upload a picture, it can kind of give you similar species in the area to help you ID that species, but also there are a community of people to help confirm what that species is. But if you want to report an insect and you do see one, again, do your best, try to maybe make sure to get close enough and make sure it's in focus. Again, many smartphones these days have Zoom capabilities and then directly linked to the reporting app like iNaturalist, but you feel free to use a camera as well. And James kind of showed that you can drag and drop into a profile on your desktop. And I think the biggest thing as well from our end anyways is just paying attention to those host species and the pathways of spread. And so on our website, we have a page, reportcanadainvasives.ca, which kind of collects the reporting information across Canada. So some of our chapters use iNaturalist, some use EdMaps, that kind of thing. So we've tried to collect that information and put it on our website. We're also in the midst of updating that. There are some broken links, so I just want to mention that. So we're going to be updating that quite quickly, but also it's really important to just, if you're in a certain province or territory, Google your council, and they have tons of resources, tons of information on more ID, how to report, etc. But again, iNaturalist is great and we do promote it, and we actually have a project as part of iNaturalist called I Spy and Identify Invasives, the first national invasive species related project on iNaturalist. So you can just go to iNaturalist.org and look up that project and join. And some of you may have already joined, or when you do go to join, you might notice that we do also collect native species information. And again, we've kind of come to the determination that the more the merrier. So again, that you don't have to be an expert, and not everyone is an expert, but the more species we're reporting, native, otherwise, the more chances that invasives are introduced are going to be discovered and reported as well. And as I mentioned, just search your provincial territory chapter or council to learn more from their resources. And then just quickly plug on our kind of take action programs, which are really meant for organizations across Canada who are involved in stopping the spread of invasive species in one way or another to join and then promote. But there's a lot of actions on our website that you can learn from as well, following these kind of programs and pathways. Yeah. And I think that's it.
That was great. Thank you, Kelly. Super informative. We have a bunch of questions and not time to get to all of them, but I'm going to try and at least tie into some key ones and some that have kind of a common theme. Like one actually kind of that leads in well with your last slide is with what to do about it when you see an invasive species. So one is you touched on to report it, but a couple of people ask, should they kill it for an invasive insect? I guess you want to be very sure you've got the ID right.
Yeah. I think it's funny because I'm kind of jumping here with things like goldfish and some of like the aquatic species like gobies and stuff. Like that is the answer, is like kill it, like take a picture, kill it, but keep it if you do want to make sure that maybe you get another ID. But that is a good point in making sure that is the invasive before you do kill it. But we also don't want it to spread as well. So if you're able to at least capture it, take the picture with it being captured. Again, these are all tricky. Like you might not be able to capture it. You might get a picture and then it hop off. But yeah, if you're really sure it's the invasive, like say a lily leaf beetle, probably pretty defined that it's the lily leaf beetle. So you could probably take a picture, report it, and kill it. Same with things like emerald ash borer, like, but it's important to keep them still, like, and to be able to, just in case someone does want to follow up with you if you're in an urban area, to check out emerald ash borer or something like that.
Great. And a great tip someone just wrote into the chat was that you can put it in the freezer to kill them, which also helps to preserve it for identification, yes, to get a good photo. Absolutely. And yeah, stops it from moving while you get a picture.
Yeah, perfect. That's exactly it. Yep.
Also tying into the kind of reporting in that, someone was asking, does EdMaps also track insects, or is it just specific to plants?
EdMap?
Yeah, so maybe you can mention what it is and whether it applies to insects as well.
EdMaps, so as I mentioned, like we try to collect and put this information on our website, but across Canada, there's a few different reporting apps being used: iNaturalist, EdMaps, IMAP, etc. So EdMaps is a platform similar to iNaturalist that was developed by the University of Georgia, and I believe it's being used by the Ontario invasive plant council, but the invading species awareness program as well. And I think it's used in Alberta and one other province, but essentially it is similar to iNaturalist, is that it's a reporting app that can be downloaded on your phone or used on your desktop. And yes, it does. I'm 100% sure it tracks plants, insects, etc. Like it's the same kind of philosophy around iNaturalist as early detection, rapid response. So it does track, and it has invasive species information as well on insects, plants, fish, etc.
Great, thanks. Another kind of question that I think will apply to all the species you touched on, but it was asking about one in particular, but is what keeps, I can't remember which one was asked for specifically, but what keeps these in check? Oh, it was about the emerald ash borer. What keeps them in check in their countries of origin? So versus when they get here. And I guess obviously you can talk to like local native predators, and that we don't have here potentially when something becomes introduced.
Yeah, you probably know a lot about this too, and just touched on it as well. But essentially, like when a species is native to an area, like emerald ash borer in its native origin, it has those natural predators. Like it evolved with natural predators, you know, things to keep it in check, mostly natural predators, maybe conditions, environmental conditions, that kind of thing. So when a species is native to an area, it evolves to be naturally checked, I guess you could say, in that area. And so here, emerald ash borer doesn't have those natural predators. And at one point, I think there was I believe there were studies on, or there has been studies on, like if it's killed off in the winter and that kind of thing, and it doesn't seem to be really having an impact. And even with climate change, like potentially the areas could be even more suitable for emerald ash borer, maybe moving more north in Canada, that kind of thing. So yeah, just most invasives you could kind of tie together in that they don't have those natural predators keeping them in check. And they have the conditions available now, or they become able to just take over an area and it'll compete it for food, that kind of thing.
Great. And maybe one last one I think is really interesting to finish on. So we talk about invasive species of like kind of hitching a ride or being unintentionally introduced here in Canada, but what about some commercial species? Have any of those become invasive themselves. So an example of thinking of the honeybees, which are not native to Canada. Are there those or other species that are kind of becoming introduced or invasive because they've been intentionally brought here by people?
Yeah, so this is where it's going, and I maybe should have mentioned this at the beginning and kind of tying into like what, and maybe you can clarify this about if I'm right on how it's defined within iNaturalist, but an introduced species isn't necessarily invasive. So we do have a lot of, in Canada, introduced but non-invasive, non-native species. So that's one of the things why we don't want to paint like a pathway, but with a broad brush, particularly like say the horticulture or ornamental industry. Like we have tons of ornamental and horticultural species in Canada that aren't invasive but are non-native. So sometimes they don't take over. Like there's obviously certain other characteristics, which I should have mentioned before, that makes it invasive. So they might not have natural predators, but maybe they produce like tons of seeds. They're put in certain environments that they can take over, whereas some of these other non-native, non-invasive species, I'm trying to think of like an ornamental, like, I don't know, like maybe like a hosta or something like that. I'm not sure. I don't like, most likely that was introduced, but it's not invasive. It doesn't spread quickly. It doesn't, it's, the environment, I guess, is a little bit less conducive for it to take over, that kind of thing. So there are those key defining features as well biologically within invasives that make them spread and cause damage.
Mm-hmm. So are there examples where some insects have kind of reached that threshold of being thought of as invasive that have been intentionally brought over that you know of?
I'm trying to think. Intentionally brought over but aren't invasive.
Mm-hmm. Like honeybees is a good example, right? They're everywhere, and a lot of them have naturalized.
Yes,
in different places. Yeah.
Other than that, I can't think of anything. I'm sure there is, but I can't think of anything at the top of my mind. Yeah. And then we've had incidents where they were brought over and then they do become damaged, like I mentioned with the gypsy moth. And the failed experiment there. But yeah, I can't, but that is a good example of honeybees. Insects. I'm more of I think I could probably think of more plants than insects, to be honest. Yeah.
Great. Something to think about. And if we can come up with an answer, we can send that around to people afterwards.
Yeah, for sure. I will do that and I'll send it out to you and maybe you can send it out.
Great. Yeah. Well, we're a touch over time, but that was super informative. So I want to thank you, Kelly, for presenting really valuable information. And thank you to everybody for attending and taking time out of your day to listen in. And stay tuned in about a month. So the last Tuesday of every month is what we're aiming for some of these CSI, Canadian Species Identification series.
Yes, awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope that was helpful.
Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, thank you.